Hey folks, this is Dave Lentz. I'm a lawyer with 42 years, well, about a month or two short of 42 years of legal experience in both trial work and in corporate work, and even with the government. And I'm here to basically help you determine whether or not you want to go into law as a career. This is a I'm doing a series of videos on this, but for folks who want the quick and dirty, don't want the more in-depth exploration that I've done in some of the other videos that I have done, and some more that I'm going to do on this very subject. This is a good video not only for folks that want to go to law school, but also for their parents, their spouses, their loved ones, their significant others, anybody that might be affected by the decision of somebody close to them to go to law school and to become a lawyer. So without further ado, thanks for watching this. Here is my quick and dirty on whether somebody should become a lawyer.
Okay, so we're talking about choosing law as a career path. So let's talk about some of the positives of being a lawyer. Intellectually, it's very challenging. There's no question that it stimulates the brain, and that is one of the biggest attributes that I find attractive about law. Number two, you meet a lot of very important people. Even on the local level, state and local political leaders, meet judges, of course, especially if you're a litigator, and those help build networks that could be useful in the future to get you through your life for references and things like that, and to do business deals or whatever. Usually law is not boring. Now, I've been in litigation and in corporate work, and I recall when I was doing municipal bond work for the state housing authority, and man, we had lots and lots of documents, and it was very tedious and arguably, well, no, I found it to be very boring. But on the other hand, in that situation, I was dealing with a lot of other lawyers, and I wasn't the only one having input. I've worked on real estate deals, for example, where I've done lots of documents, but I was more or less the guy that was in charge, and if I screwed it up, somebody was going to be in bad shape. And under those circumstances, where it was really my rear end that was on the line, even though it was probably very similar in terms of potentially being boring work, I was not bored. Believe me, I was on pins and needles the whole time. And so it can be both, but it is very tedious at times, especially if you do a lot of corporate work. Now, trial work is, I've never found trial work to be boring, never. Yeah, I guess, and as a consequence of all of that, the fact that it is interesting. I remember handling several years criminal matters, a lot of interesting stories. But even in commercial, doing deals in the corporate world, you can come up with some pretty interesting stories. So, in terms of cocktail chatter, I guess that law does have some advantages there. You have as a lawyer, you have a great sense of pride in what you achieved just to pass the bar and get through law school and all that kind of stuff. And you do get a little bit of a kick out of looking at your diplomas every now and then or whatever. You feel like you understand the world in our country better than most people. You sort of understand the system. Well, you don't sort of. You better understand it pretty well if you're a lawyer. So this gives you an overall sense of confidence, which is very nice. That's very nice, yes. Okay, graduating from law school, passing the bar, and even getting into law school in the first place are all big lifetime high moments. I mean, you know where you were, you remember where you were when it happened, and the way you felt, and very memorable moments. Okay, it's good. Law is in law school, and just being a lawyer is good training to do many other types of jobs in insurance, investment banking, real estate development, even to be an agent for an athlete. There are a lot. I'm sure I'm missing some biggies here. A judge, or if you're going to get into politics, you might want to put these in here: a judge, politics, and another one is in terms of potentially giving you flexibility in terms of career path, going to law school. It looks good on your resume. Yes, but this. My feeling is now I had brief stints in the mortgage business and in the securities business, and I will just tell you that when you're a lot of times, and it will come into play, that you'll find that actually having a law degree on your resume is actually a negative because you can be overqualified. And a lot of times getting hired is really more a question of fit than who is the most qualified, how you're going to fit into that organization. And you're not generally going to be hired by somebody. So, well, I don't want to overstate the case. There is a fear on the part of some to hire somebody that has more qualifications than they do. So even though it does look good on your resume, sometimes it's actually a negative. Yeah, and I guess before I go on much further, I should mention that it really is noticeable that in the vast majority of instances, when you're a lawyer, you are dealing generally with very competent people, not only other lawyers within your firm, but that includes your adversaries as well, and staff and the court system. There are minor exceptions here and there, but by and large, you're dealing with people that know what they're doing. And by and large, I can say this, that a lot of people find this very hard to believe, but I think that lawyers are much more ethical on the whole than the general public is. And I have lots of respect for most lawyers. And despite what I say elsewhere in this video, I have lots of respect for every judge I've ever had. Seriously, cross my heart, hope to die if it's a lie. But that doesn't mean I don't get really angry sometimes with some of the stuff. But they are high quality people, and just most of the time they're just trying to do what they're supposed to do. And I just also have to mention that maybe on the other side that there's a lot of competitiveness, and for that reason, an occasional bout of backstabbing may occur. But I really haven't run into too much of that in any event. So. Okay, and certainly in terms of the pros, the last but certainly not least is the question of how much money can you expect to make as a lawyer. There's no question that some lawyers make lots of money, way up in the six figures, some even seven figures. Plaintiffs' personal injury attorneys that do a lot of contingent fee work can make almost astronomical figures. Lawyers that work with large, prestigious law firms, with a lot of securities lawyers, and lawyers that work in the investment banking field. There's just large law firms. The lawyers, if you can stay there and stick it out and make partner, you can get up there in the high six figures, even seven figures, no question about it. But let me just say this. I have some question about whether the statistics regarding what lawyers make are not somewhat misleading. I don't think, I'm just going to say this, and you'd have to look at a couple of my other videos where I get into this a little bit more. You've got underemployed lawyers, and you've got lawyers that have been out of work and just given up. looking for a job. And a lot of statistics, I think, just sort of gloss over some of this. And I can't make this point strongly enough. You're only as rich as your clients are. Uh, reason that these guys at the prestigious law firms make so much money is they're representing major corporations that have virtually unlimited cash. And I have another video where I talk about flat fee cases, and I talk about what court-appointed lawyers who represent poor folks in court make. And believe me, those folks don't make anywhere near this kind of money up here. Pretty much some of the court-appointed fee schedules are, you end up, I seriously question whether you're actually making any money at all on the cases, and it's certainly, think in terms of minimum wage, all right? And I'm not being facetious. I used to say that when I first, I've been practicing for about 40 years. I used to say that 20% of the lawyers make 80% of the money, and 80%, 20% of the lawyers make 80% of the money. And nowadays, that was what I used to say decades ago. Now I say 5% of the lawyers make 95% of the money. In any event, we will talk about some of the other aspects of some of court-appointed attorneys in other videos, and we will talk about things like document review later on in this video, and it will sort of, and when we do that, we're sort of getting to this discussion right here, because that's the net effect that produces this sort of situation, this 95-5 situation. Okay, we've talked about the positives of choosing law as a career. Now we're going to talk about the cons. We've done another video that talks exclusively about costs, so you may want to check that out. But the bottom line is educational costs can run, depending on how much you can, how much you're going to get in terms of things like scholarships and things, grants and scholarships. It can end up costing you $100,000 plus, maybe even get up there over $200,000. And we make the point that student loans, which are often used to finance most of this, are non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. In other words, you can't escape the student loans by filing for bankruptcy. There is a hardship exception to that, but the bankruptcy courts don't like to give those hardship exceptions. And anyway, so that gives you some sense of the gravity of what your risk is by choosing law as a profession. And of course, you've got at least 3 years of foregone income, and maybe even a little bit more, because you got to take the bar exam after you graduate, and then you got to wait for results. So this theoretically could almost get to, like, we'll say 3.5 years. Okay. Now you might be able to wedge in some part-time income in there, but your buddies are out there making serious money, and you're making part-time pay. So those are two right off the bat big potential negatives. Well, no, they're not potential negatives. They are negatives about choosing to go to law school and becoming a lawyer. Yeah, and here's an issue that's a con, a negative. It has to do with job mobility. There are a lot of potential glitches in terms of job mobility for lawyers, switching from one firm or one organization to another. fit is a big issue. It's the biggest issue. It's not necessarily who has the most credentials, who's the best at something. It has more to do with how you fit within an organization, and particularly if you're talking about switching in law firms, going from one law firm to another, as opposed to a law firm from a law firm to a corporation, for example. But if you're switching between law firms, it's what clients will walk out the door with you and go with you to the new firm. That is probably the biggest issue. The next is how age-wise and experience-wise do you fit in with the existing personnel. It's not as so much a question of who's the most qualified. Fit is a very big issue. It's like when you graduate from law school, you think of yourself while you're in school as being a sophomore, junior, or senior, or whatever. When you get into law, it's much the same thing. And here you've graduated many years ago, but how many years experience all of a sudden becomes a big issue. You will see ads in the legal publications looking for lawyers with 1 to 3 years of experience. They want younger lawyers that aren't going to potentially take business out the door with them, where you don't have a lot of rivalry within a firm once you go there. And instead of hiring somebody with 10 years of experience who really knows the ropes, they a lot of times want somebody with 1 to 3 years. That's really fairly typical, actually. So mobility is a big issue. It sometimes is difficult, and that has a tendency to work against older lawyers. The only time that's an exception would potentially be is if you had somebody that went to law school in their late 40s. They might have 3 years experience by the time they're 50. So even though that, you understand what I'm saying, but the net effect of the way things work out in the legal profession is there's a lot of age discrimination. Now, let's go to the next point. If you want to say you're sick and tired of trying to practice law in whatever state that you're in and you want to pick up and move, well, no siree. What you've got to do is you have to take the bar exam in the next state, unless you're eligible for reciprocity. Now, reciprocity is only where one state will recognize the lawyers of another state if they've moved and had typically it would be something like 5 years of experience in their old state of continuous experience. And they won't count things like something like, a lot of them won't count things like document review or something like that as being continuous legal experience. And so you got to move there, and then you've got to have this continuous prior experience. The rules can get very complicated. But anyway, if you have reciprocity, you don't have to take the bar exam. And I'll give you an example. And I think this is still right. I'm not sure. Last time, I live in Virginia. The last time I checked, Pennsylvania, for example, had reciprocity with Virginia, but North Carolina didn't. So I can't move to North Carolina. Now, I've practiced law here for 40 years. I can't move to North Carolina and automatically become a lawyer. Okay. But I could theoretically in Pennsylvania. Okay. If the rules are still as I recall them to be, they could have changed. But that's still an issue, that type of situation. So this always left you with the possibility of taking several bar exams. And here's the big deal on this. Look at this baby. The bar review course fees can go up to about $4,000. Okay, and you might flunk. Okay, now you can find bar review courses for a lot cheaper than that. I said up to. Okay, but that's a major expense that I didn't include in the other expense video. Silly me. But that's a big deal. Now the situation is improving a little bit because UBE, the Uniform Bar Examination, basically allows you to take a bar exam that applies and it satisfies a at least all or part of the requirements in many states, okay? And big states like Texas and New York are now accepting the UBE. If you pass that, you're basically satisfied all or part of the requirements in New York and Texas. Illinois, they accept the UBE. Ohio does. California does not. Florida does not. Pennsylvania does not. Virginia does not. So that situation is changing, and it seems like more and more states are jumping on board with that. That would be a vast improvement, but lawyers are very protective of their little jurisdictions, and so much remains to be seen there on that front. But this is a big issue, this job mobility issue. Like I said, with the advent of the UBE, it is getting, probably you would have to say that's an improvement, but that is something to consider. Now, the third is the intense competition for jobs, and this is really part of the consequences and realities of the job market. There are probably too many lawyers, and there's a wealth gap in America. We discussed in other videos that John Q. Citizen, anybody that's living paycheck to paycheck, which unfortunately is most Americans, usually if you're making under like $80,000 a year, and unless you have a trust fund or some kind of significant savings or equity in something, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, you cannot afford any kind of extensive legal representation. The most you're going to be able to afford is something like, for a residential real estate closing, a simple will, misdemeanor traffic case, misdemeanors, simple bankruptcy, something like that, no fault divorce. But if it gets anywhere near complicated, where you're going to have to spend more than $2,000 or $3,000 of your money for a lawyer, you are not going to probably be able to afford a lawyer. If you graduate from law school because of the intense competition, you're likely to face prolonged periods of unemployment or underemployment, where you have to take a job that's really beneath your educational qualifications. This leads to frustration, disappointment, and I'm going to talk for a second here about long hours and all this stuff. And this frustration that builds eventually will have an effect on your family and personal relationships. Clients, now listen carefully to this one. Clients, the state legislature, the state bar, quite mistakenly think that lawyers are rich when they are not. Then that we just wave a magic wand and we can fix something. A lot of times we're up against an adversary that's very smart. Situations there's a lot of gray area in the law, but all those folks, the clients, the state legislature, and the bar, they don't have any appreciation, very little, almost none, for the amount of time it takes to prepare a case, and the cost of becoming professionally certified and to maintain your certification. In short, the clients, the state legislature, and the bar quite mistakenly think often that we are money-grubbing lawyers or whatever. And it's just not the case. Quite the opposite. A lot of times we're desperate. And to add insult to injury, many statutes, I'm thinking here about like bankruptcy, where the bankruptcy courts regulate the amount of fees you can charge, and like court-appointed attorneys, their fees are regulated in the end, and they're almost always too low. Or they are so low that there's not very much profit margin in them, and in order to do those cases, you got to do a gazillion of them. And you've got to really be a cookie cutter type of lawyer building, you're building sheep. Well, I'm not even going to get into that. Assembly line law is what you're talking about. Yeah, and lest I go overboard, if I want to be fair about this, in more recent years, the bar has done some things to try to ease our pain a little bit as lawyers. And so I sort of got a little excited there. Um, uh, I still feel the way I've just explained in a lot of respects, but the bar has tried to ease our pain in certain respects. So I will give them a little bit of credit, but I've got a lot of areas where I just think that uh, the bar and the state legislature just still uh, cast a lot of burdens of the system onto lawyers' back in such a way as that you almost feel like you're a slave for the system. Often in cases we have to wait a long time to get paid. I'm talking about small-time practitioners here. And I'm not talking about associates at larger law firms or associates or lawyers that work for corporations or the government, but for the little lawyer out there who's basically engaged in the what I'll call the general practice of law, which is almost become a dinosaur. You have to wait a long time to get paid. Personal injury cases, you don't get paid. You got to carry that case until the case settles. If it settles, if you lose, you go through all the time and expense of preparing a case, go through a jury trial, and you lose. Guess what? It's all time spent for nothing. And in the meantime, you've paid your rent, your secretary, and all this, and it's a huge financial loss. I talked a little bit, I hope I have, about the escrow account rules, that even if you've collected your fees up front, if the case takes several months or even a year to resolve, guess what? Even if you have that money in your escrow account, you're not allowed to cash in on it under most circumstances until the case concludes. That's a complicated subject, but it's an extra layer of bookkeeping costs that are in there. And I think I discussed that somewhere too. Must be able to financially carry the case and your costs of operation for many, many months. So I'm talking there again about your lawyers that are in smaller practices. Yes, when I say carrying the cost of the case, to take an extremely simple example, if you've got a case, what I'm saying is you're not getting paid on that case for many months. You've got zero income coming in with respect to that case. And in the meantime, you've got to pay your secretary and your rent, pay for your office expenses, your paper, if your computers malfunction or whatever. You got to pay for all that. That's why you got to financially carry it, and you've got to carry it for months. And in some personal injury cases, it may be over a year. But this all goes to even when I think about it, an even more fundamental point, which is that in a lot of respects, a lot of people go to law school and they think they're going to come out and get a quote a job. Well, increasingly, what may well happen to a lot of folks, except the people that are at the top echelon of their law classes, they're really going to go out and have to compete in the marketplace as an independent business, a practitioner running your own law firm. Now, that may sound glorious on the one hand, but now think about it. I just got done talking about carrying the cost of the case. This is why it's very dangerous for younger lawyers, especially, to go to law school thinking they're going to come out and go into practice for themselves, unless they've got some kind of financial cushion. God knows how many tens of thousands of dollars to carry themselves for a few months so that they can take cases where they're not going to get paid right away. This carry gets a lot of lawyers into trouble regarding these things called the escrow account that I've mentioned. And a lot of people lose their law license over problems with the escrow account. And so what I'm saying is don't think that you're going to come out and go into law practice unless I generally, just based on my experience, have told people that I would be very, very hesitant to go out. This depends on your location too, where the cost and standard of living is in various locations. I have basically, what I normally tell people is I would not even venture to go out and practice law on my own, straight out of law school, or at any point, unless I had probably $40,000 or $50,000 that in accessible cash somewhere, so I could carry myself for at least 6 months, uh, and probably even a little bit more financially if no income was coming in. And a lot of people get in trouble. They end up sucking wind. The money is going out, and all of a sudden they're sitting there desperately, and they see a few bucks sitting in the escrow account, which they're not allowed to touch yet under the rules. And they dip into the escrow account. Pretty soon, if they do that several times, and all of a sudden they get sideways financially later on, they get in trouble with the bar. They lose their law license. You're going to have long hours. And the cumulative effect of all of the foregoing is the psychological impact of the fact that reality is far, far different than virtually everyone's perceptions and expectations, including your own. I think the word for that is cognitive dissonance. I don't know, but whatever. I hope maybe I'm not using the correct psychological term, but that is a lingering thought in your psyche, is carried over many years. Okay, I'm going to talk here about document review because it's both a pro and a con of making the choice to become a lawyer. This is a creature of the 21st century. Increasingly, what you see in the legal profession is that a lot of lawyers, whether they like it or not, are shifted into something called document review. And this is an evolving and changing area. But basically, it's kind of originally set up as a way that law intersects with information technology, particularly managing lots of data, and in this case, lots of documents. In law, and especially in trial matters, litigation matters, the two sides can ask each other for documents that they have in their possession. And that's called discovery. Discovery is not just in document review, but even for smaller cases, there's something called discovery. But in major corporate litigation, where you're talking about thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of documents, you engage in this stuff called e-discovery. And it's, like I said, it is a evolving area. And a lot of lawyers find themselves eventually, either to begin with or eventually, in this area. And what are some of the pros of document review? Well, it acquaints you and gets you involved in information technology, so you, in a sense, are in dealing with a fairly high-tech area. In the course of this, you're making decisions, you're reviewing documents, and what you're really doing in connection with the e-discovery process is you're making decisions, and normally there's several layers of review, but at least at some point you're going to make decisions on whether the documents should be produced or withheld, and whether there's redactions, and or one of the reasons why they might be withheld is because it's, for example, if the document is not relevant, or if it's privileged. And an example would be attorney-client privilege. And redactions. And normally redactions are where you black stuff out so that you produce the document, but you don't let the other side see certain information within the document because you've redacted it, you've blacked it out basically. This is usually for health, private health information is one area, and there's what else? There are you can have redactions for privilege too. Um, Anyway, but this is where you have the most intersection with law because this here has to do with relevance, privilege, attorney-client, HIPAA, which is, you're not supposed to disclose people's medical records, certain things about their medical history. You have certain privacy information too, like social security numbers. And various other pieces of information. So you got to redact it, and then you hand over the remainder to the other side during the course of this discovery process. So you're involved in this. Now, in a sense, you are dealing with other lawyers. I mean, because lawyers up the food chain are facing each other in the courtroom. You're not really working for the law firm. You're working for the document review firm. These are separate companies that do this. And a lot of times they are offshoots. Law firms have created these separate companies to do this document review stuff. But so in a sense, you are dealing with other lawyers, but no, you're not. You're dealing mostly with a lot of internally other lawyers that you work with, but a lot of computer people is what you're dealing with. Your computer people and your info tech people. That's who you're dealing with. It's basically usually e-discovery is you're dealing with major corporate litigation, pharmaceutical cases, drug companies get sued a lot, and there's e-discovery, and they have millions of documents. Intellectual property, patent cases. Every now and then you'll have a products liability case or something like that. But it is, it is legally related. But what you're going to find is on the con side, you're really not lawyering. You are looking for things dealing with relevance, if something should be redacted in attorney-client privilege, but you're reviewing thousands of documents and you're going through them, and it's very tedious, and it can get to be very boring, and you feel like at the end you're reading stuff so fast you're not absorbing anything. It's just amazing how I don't know if you've ever just like typed a document, like in the old days learning how to type. You end up doing all this typing in a document, but in the end you realize you don't know anything about what you just typed. And that's sort of the way you feel in document review, that you don't really know anything about all these documents you just reviewed because you're looking for just key things, and you're focused, and you're just racing through this stuff, and you're just focused on these very narrow issues. It's a gig economy. It's not like this is a full-time job. It's case by case, and so you may be working for 2 or 3 weeks, and then off for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. And a lot of times a lot of these firms don't want you to work on outside employment while you're doing these projects, these document review projects, which is, let's put it this way, that's not nice and it's unfair. So anyway, there are other non-discovery types of projects out there. Just in case a company wants to hire somebody to categorize or do whatever their documents, you can do those kind of document review cases as well. And it's hourly pay, usually no fringe benefits, although some of the firms that do this kind of work really do try fairly hard occasionally to keep certain people employed all the time and to get and to provide certain benefits. But you basically, if you're doing this, you're going to be paid hourly with no fringe benefits. And let me tell you, reviewing documents like that for 8 hours can be very, very grinding. Anyway, I just thought I would just say that. Right now the hourly pay rate is somewhere between like about $23 an hour and about $28 an hour. Most of the places I've seen. Now I don't know what it is in places like New York City or places like that, but usually in middle America, that's the kind of rate you're looking at. You're an hourly worker. So I thought I should mention that because a lot of lawyers find themselves in the document review arena.
Okay, I guess that brings us to the end of our journey here. A few concluding remarks here. I generally tell people that I think that whether somebody should go to law school centers around these factors. If you've got like a father or a relative that's in the practice of law and can get you into a good practice, maybe. If you're a real El Primo intellectual, got to be a lawyer willing to spend, 18 hours a day practicing law. You probably ought to go for it, especially if you're confident you think you're going to finish in the top 5% of your class. Go for it. Or if you think you would be happy working in the government and you think you're in the top 15% of your class, go for it. Everybody else, unless you come out, you're confident you can escape law school, pass the bar, and come out and have somebody give you a lot of business, and or you have $40,000 or $50,000 or more in the bank, readily accessible cash, because what you're going to be is you may not get a job. You may have to go into business for yourself. And if you do, you better have a little bit of money in the cash to be able to, a little cash in the bank to be able to carry you for a while. Unless you fall in one of those types of categories, I would say no, don't go to law school. I would say, but I generally it's a guesstimate. It's a guesstimate. There are too many lawyers. Too many Americans cannot afford extensive legal services if they're living, because most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. For those two factors, and the fact that between the real estate industry and others, even certain courts which have these small claims courts which don't allow lawyers, the legal profession has been chipped at from a lot of different directions. And if you chop up any profession into enough component parts, you can put a non-lawyer into that position. And that has in fact occurred in several areas. For all those reasons, and I say that probably 4 out of 5 people, maybe higher, 4 out of 5 people that want to go to law school, or if they can go to law school, probably should not go to law school. I hate to say that, because there's a lot about law that I'm proud of, and I do think it's a noble profession, but the risks are too high. I've had too many friends lose their law license. I had one actually spend time in jail, and these are people that they weren't sleazy people to begin with, but it's easy to be. There are just so many little traps out there, so you're forewarned. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you got something out of it. There are probably some other videos that I've done on this subject out there, and I'm probably going to do a few more, but this is sort of the summary one for those that want the quick and dirty, if you can call it that. But this is Dave Lentz. Thanks for joining us and watching these videos, and I will see you next time. Thanks.
Okay, here's yours truly. If you have any questions or comments, you can contact me here on the Contact Us page. If you want to learn a little bit more about me, I think my resume is right here for you to peruse at your leisure. There's even another video there apparently, and you see maybe this is, and okay, and also have this website, which we're going to probably post this video to. It's at reasonandbalance.com. If you like us, please click the like us button. If you want to donate, we do have a donations page. These videos take a while to put together, and any help in that regard would be greatly appreciated. But this is Dave Lentz, and I want to thank everybody for watching.